Hello, and welcome to the BYU Family History Library webinar series. We're glad you could join us today. I'm Bryant, and I'll be your host for this webinar. Please make sure your microphones and web cameras are disabled during the presentation to provide a smooth recording. If you have technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box, and I can address your concerns. You're welcome to use the chat box during the webinar for comments and insights. However, all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Our upcoming webinars are on February 21st, Friday at 4 p.m., Making the Most Out of German Immigrants in American Church Records with Dr. Roger Meinert. Also, we'd like to remind you that on February 28th, there will be no webinar due to Roots Tech. If you would like to access a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded by the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links to recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. For today's webinar, we are pleased to hear from Kathryn Grant, who will be giving a presentation on double trouble, to merge or not to merge. After years on the sidelines, Kathryn began doing family history and discovered that she loved it. Her specialty is helping new family historians find success and maybe even avoid some of the mistakes she's made. Kathryn teaches Sunday classes at the BYU Family History Library. She also presents at Riverton, Utah Saturday seminars and other family history events. Her column on family history ran in the Nauvoo Times for about a year and is still available online. In addition, she is a regular contributor to the FamilySearch blog. Kathryn works as a technical writer and instructional designer with a focus on usability and process improvement. Besides family history, she loves uplifting music, thought-provoking books, and springtime. If Kathryn is ready, we'll turn the time over to her.
Great, Bryant, thank you so much. We'll just get our screen shared over here. Okay, I think we're good to go. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar. I'm really excited about this webinar. I think it addresses a topic that affects all of us, and so I hope you'll find it valuable. Let's take a look at what we're going to be covering today. First of all, we'll talk about family tree and the challenge of duplicates. This is nothing new. It's been going on for a while, and FamilySearch keeps finding better and better ways to address it. So we'll be talking about that to give some context. And then we'll give an example of a good merge also to give some context. Then after that, we will look at a merge that's maybe not quite so obvious, and we'll try to figure out whether we should make the merge or not. After that, we will discuss a common issue. Just the other day, my sister had come across an incorrect merge, and she sent a really nice email to the person who'd done the merge, and my sister undid it and explained why she did it. And this was the response of the woman. She felt terrible. She said, "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to, do it incorrectly." And they had a really pleasant exchange. There was no hard feelings or anything. But her statement was, well, Family Tree said it was a duplicate. So she had relied on that information, and I've heard other people say the same thing. So we'll talk about that issue and how we can address that and maybe not be led astray by it. And then finally, we'll talk about what we've learned throughout this presentation, and we'll kind of distill everything into principles for avoiding incorrect merges. So first off, family tree and the challenge of duplicates. In order to understand why duplicates are a problem, it's important to understand the goal of Family Tree, which is actually different from most other family history websites. And that is to have one complete and accurate record for each person who's lived on the earth, linked to other records by correct relationships. So what is a duplicate then in Family Tree? Well, it's a record that represents the same person as another record. Every record in Family Tree has a unique identifier, and you can imagine why that would be necessary because so many people have similar or the same names across many generations or across countries or whatever. So you see here, this Phoebe and Gunton, one of the records ends in G9P, and the other record, the PID, ends in GHW. So while you look at these and the names are the same and the information is the same, the fact that there are two different PIDs, or sometimes they're called PIDs or ID numbers, but basically they've got two different numbers, which means that those records are really separate records, even though we can kind of tell by looking at them that they represent the same person. So the solution to duplicate records in FamilySearch or in Family Tree is that the system allows us as users to merge them. In other words, we can combine two records for the same person into one record. But that comes with a risk, and that is that we as users can merge two records that aren't really duplicates. So let's talk about why that's a problem. There are a number of different reasons. Incorrect merges often lead to even more mistakes, including more incorrect merges. And a reason for that is that the information gets corrupted about the person. Maybe a birth year is changed, or a birthplace is changed, or children are changed or added. And so then the system finds more information, like more record hints, more things like that, based on the incorrect information, and then people will add that information and the record just keeps getting corrupted more and more. Incorrect merges often can lead to more duplicates. They can lead to invalid or delayed temple work. So imagine this scenario in your mind. There's one record, let's say it's for a John Smith, and it has the temple work done. And then there's two other records for John Smiths, and they don't have temple work done. They're not really the same person, but somebody decides to merge all three of them. So on the surviving record of the original John Smith, that temple work shows as being completed, and yet those two other John Smiths that were merged into him didn't have their temple work done, except now nobody can see that they didn't have their temple work done because of that incorrect merge. Incorrect merges also require significant effort to repair. They're really tricky to untangle correctly, especially if there have been multiple incorrect merges. So they can end up being very time consuming. Just as an example, recently I found a pretty big tangle on my Pringle line that crossed several generations and involved at least 5 families that were not really the same family. I would suspect that up to this point, I've spent something like, I don't know, maybe 15 to 20 hours untangling about 50 incorrect merges, and it's not finished yet. And so you can see from that that it can be really time consuming to untangle incorrect merges, and it's a lot better if we can avoid making those incorrect merges in the first place. So that's what we hope to do today, is to give you some ammunition, as it were, to avoid those incorrect merges when you're either working on your own lines or perhaps helping somebody else. So how can we avoid incorrect merges? To start out, let's look at an example of a good merge, because that will help us recognize what's good. Then when we don't see things that are good in merges, then, or potential merges, then maybe we can stop and realize, we need to do a little more research here. So an example of a good merge. I'd like to introduce you again to Phoebe and Gunton. We looked at her record a little bit earlier. You notice that she's got the two separate PIDs here. So there were clearly two separate records in Family Tree. But as you look at this information about her, what do you notice? Well, it's all identical, isn't it? She's got exactly the same name. She's got, both records don't have an exact birth, but they do have an exact christening, both a christening date and a christening location. Let's look at her parents. Well, it turns out that Phoebe was born to an unwed mother, so the father was not known, but her mother is named Phoebe, so she was apparently named after her mother. But again, as we look at this, the information is identical. So we look at the source. Actually, as I recall, no sources were attached to this record, either of these records, but it was pretty easy to look in FamilySearch historical records and find a source that matched. And you notice here that all the information lines up: the name, the place, the date, the mother. And so this source is clearly for both of those Phoebes, and there weren't any other Phoebe and Guntons born at the same time. So it was pretty clear that both those records had come from this christening record. I also like to double check the changelog, and in case you're not familiar with the changelog, picture with me a family tree page, and over on the right hand side there's a box that says latest changes, and within that box at the bottom there's a link that says show all, and if you click that link you get to see all the changes that have been made to that person since they were created or brought into family tree. So, and they're in reverse chronological order. So I wanted to look at the changelog for these two Phoebe Guntons just to see, were there any merges? Were there any changes? Any other information? But these two changelogs that you see here, this is the extent of the changelog. This is all there was. So it's pretty straightforward. The mom entered as Phoebe, the dad entered as unknown, the sex is female, the christening date, the child's name who was christened, and the fact that they assume she's deceased since she was born in 1848, and that's it. So this is a very clean changelog. So as we look at all these things, this merge is pretty much a slam dunk, right? Because we've got the same child's name, the same christening date and location, the same single mother. They were both evidently extracted from the same christening record. So we can reasonably conclude, or very confidently conclude, that those two records should be merged, that they do really represent the same person. So now let's look at a few records that aren't quite so clear-cut. Let's look at, first of all, Cecilia Pringle. So Cecilia was christened on the 3rd of May, 1848 in Tynemouth, Northumberland, England. She is connected in the system to two parents. She's got John Pringle as her dad, and she's got Eleanor as the mom with no maiden surname. So you may be wondering, why doesn't Eleanor have a surname? And that is because on the English record from which this christening record was taken, the mother's maiden name, in fact, the mother's surname was just not given. The family name was given, but we aren't told the maiden name of the mother on the christening record. So let's take a look and see if we've got any other information about Cecilia's parents. So what you see here are screenshots of the vital information section on John Pringle's person page and on Eleanor's person page. What do you notice as you look at this? It's pretty sparse, right? All we've got is a full name for the dad, a partial name for the mom. We've got the sex of each of them. We've got that they're deceased, which the system concludes because their child was born in 1848. So of course they're going to be deceased by now. But that's pretty much it. So this is a summary of what we know about Cecilia's parents. We know their names. We know that they had a daughter named Cecilia, and we know that at least for a time they probably lived in Tynemouth, Northumberland, because that's where Cecilia was christened. So, and I should comment, this little case study here is actually based on an incorrect merge that I was able to undo. So I'm walking through what I believe was the logic that the user used when they did this incorrect merge. So the person had found these two individuals, a John Pringle and an Eleanor Berkeley, and had concluded that they were probably Cecilia's parents. So let's walk through and let's see if we agree with that conclusion or if we maybe are warranted in making a different conclusion. So because of space constraints on the screen, I wasn't able to grab or to display all the information for John and Eleanor, but I am going to summarize it here. So John, according to this record in Family Tree, was born in 1785 in Ilderton, Northumberland. His wife Eleanor was born in 1797 in Cramlington. As you can see from the screen, their children range in birth year from 1820 to 1836. And then finally, again, I couldn't display all the children's vital information, but their children were born in either Ursden or Holywell, Northumberland, two parishes or two areas that are very close together. So these are the facts that we know about this family. And so now we want to kind of do some sanity checking and see if we think that these people could be Cecilia's parents. So in the first column, this is what we know about Cecilia. She was born in 1848. We know from looking at these proposed parents for Cecilia that John was born in 1785. Eleanor was born in 1797. Well, what does that mean? If we do a little calculation, we discover that John would have been 63 and Eleanor would have been 51 when Cecilia was born. Now, is that absolutely impossible? No, it could happen, but it's kind of unlikely. So it raises a little bit of a red flag there. This John and Eleanor, their children were born, as we said, from 1820 to 1836, and we know that Cecilia was born in 1848. Well, that makes Cecilia being born 12 years after the last known child of John and Eleanor. Now, is that impossible? No. Could it happen? Yeah. We've probably all have friends that have had caboose babies that are born, maybe 7, 10 or more years after the previous child. But again, it's kind of unusual. So it's probably another little red flag that we want to pay attention to. And then finally, Cecilia was christened in Tynemouth. John and Eleanor's children were born in Ursden and Holywell, which actually isn't that far away, but it's kind of unusual for children back then to be christened in different locations. So we would expect the children to be either all in the same place or possibly two places, but when you start getting three, that's a bit unusual for that time and place. Again, not impossible, but between these three things, we've kind of got some red flags that we want to pay attention to. So what do we do next? Well, we've got some facts that we need to validate. So we want to find some historical records to verify the facts that we know. And then we want to find more facts. So we're using that wonderful principle of using what we know to discover what we don't know. So let's take a look. The key records for this time and place in England, they're really simple and they're really easy to find, which should make this a pretty easy research task. So the first thing we want to do is check the census. Cecilia should be in the 1851 English census and in later censuses if she lived past infanthood. And then also, regardless of whether she lived or died, there should be a birth registration. And the wonderful thing about English birth registrations is that they're going to show Cecilia's mother's maiden name. So to find this information, I want to put a plug in for what I love to call a logo search. These logos over here on the side of the person page in Family Tree are amazing, and I think they might be one of the best kept secrets. They're not just for decoration. If you click them, they will search the website using the information off this page, so you don't even have to retype it. So it's a very quick and convenient way to do a search on any person in Family Tree. So for this particular search, I'm going to click FamilySearch and we're going to search historical records. And guess what? Cecilia and her family come right up in the 1851 census. She was the only Cecilia Pringle. So I can tell you from working on this Pringle line that these Pringles loved the names John, Eleanor, Isabella, and James. They used those names over and over and over. But I had never seen a Cecilia Pringle before, and no other Cecilia came up born in this same time period and same area. So I look at this 51 census and I'm pretty confident, in fact, I'm highly confident that this is for her. So let's again do a little fact checking. So you remember that John Pringle and Eleanor Berkeley, he was born in 1785 in Ilderton. She's 1797 in Cramlington. Well, let's take a look at the parents up here. If we compute, and I had to use a calculator, I'm just not really a math person. It's a skill I probably need to develop better. But my calculator revealed to me that John in the census was born in 1802. Eleanor was born in 1807. So those dates totally don't match. But not only that, look at John was born in Scotland, not even the same country. And I checked some other censuses, and he's always born in Scotland. So it wasn't just an anomaly in this census. And that's a good reason to say that you probably do want to check multiple censuses, because enumerators, the guys that took the censuses, they made mistakes from time to time. And just imagine how tired they got going from door to door. So we can forgive them for, we can understand how they could make a mistake. So we want to check multiple censuses and just kind of verify it. Well, he was always from Scotland, and Eleanor was always from North Shields. So I cannot imagine how John Pringle and Eleanor Berkeley could be the same people. I mean, even if we, as Cecilia's parents, even if we stretched it to the max, I can't see that we would ever think that those two people are that those couple. Okay, let me try this again. I can't see how we would ever think that those two couples were the same people. But just to be absolutely sure, let's go to step 2 that we had mentioned, which is checking Cecilia's birth registration. Well, look at who her mother is according to the birth registration. Her mother's maiden name is Dawson, not Berkeley. So our conclusion is that we don't want to merge Cecilia's parents with John Pringle and Eleanor Berkeley. We've pretty much proven that they are two separate families. So now let's address the issue of family trees saying that things are duplicates when they in fact aren't. In fairness to Family Tree, it's important to look at what Family Tree actually says. It doesn't say they are duplicates. It says they're possible duplicates. And a lot of times I think we love technology so much and we trust it highly. I mean, we can ask Google just about anything and it comes up with good answers. And so with that trust, we think, well, if FamilySearch kind of, recommended it or even brought it up, why would they bring it up if it wasn't really a duplicate? But that's a false assumption on our part, actually, because the reason Family Tree brings up these duplicates is just to help us out. But we as users have to do the verification. So in this particular example, we've got a Thomas Gunton, and you see down here, he's born in 1832 in Chartres, Cambridgeshire, and Family Tree has suggested 3 possible duplicates. We can't really tell much from this screen, so let's take a look and get more information on each of those possible duplicates. Before we do that, though, do you know what? It's probably a good idea to talk about how FamilySearch identifies possible duplicates. Again, it's not really magic. It's a numerical formula that they use. If there's a certain percentage of common information, the 2 records are flagged as duplicates. If not, they aren't. So here's an example. You can see we've got a John Besceby here, and their birth information is very similar. Their parents are very similar, just with minor information. So when the algorithm computes the percentage of matching information, in this instance, it will be very high. And so these 2 records will be flagged as possible duplicates. But now let's go back and look at these possible duplicates for Thomas. So here's in the yellow column, we've got the original record. And again, I went to the changelog just because so many records in Family Tree have had information changed, and not necessarily incorrectly, but they've had information changed, they have merges done. And so when I'm trying to figure out if 2 people are the same, I love to go into the changelog and look at how the person was initially entered. In other words, who did the contributor mean them to be? And so not looking at any of the additional information and possibly incorrect information, but when they came into the system, who were they supposed to be? So this Thomas, was actually entered by one of my cousins. And so when she entered Thomas in the system originally, she had given his birth date as 1832, his birthplace as Chartres, and his parents as William and Jane. And here also, I want to put in a plug too. Sometimes when we're trying to compare people, it can be such a tedious process, or maybe we just look and we don't write things down, and then, oh, I don't remember what I was just looking at the other screen, and it's just a pain. And I'll tell you, one of the most helpful little tools that I found is just this type of a simple table. So I just do all my stuff in Google Docs actually. And so I just create this simple table, and then I just throw in the information very quickly, just type it in. You can see it's not, I haven't spent hours on this. This kind of little table can be done actually in a matter of minutes. So when I went into this Thomas Gunton's changelog, the one that ends in PPX, this is what I found. So he's christened in 31, or excuse me, born in 31, christened in 33. The christening record actually had the birth date and the christening date on it, which was nice. And the parents were listed as Thomas and Jane. Well, right there, we've got kind of a red flag, because could this 1832 have been a guess on the part of my cousin? Yeah, it could have been. Could William's middle name be Thomas? Could he kind of go back and forth? Well, yeah, I've seen that on my lines where some people, so for a while, they'll go by their first name and then later they'll switch to their middle name. So we don't actually have proof yet that these are different people. But again, we've got a couple of maybe little red flags that we would want to check out. So let's look at our next Thomas. As we look at him, we have no birth information and we have no parents. We do have a marriage date and we have the name of his wife, the maiden name. So we know that this Thomas Gunton married in 1854 and he married a woman by the name of Susan Haynes. And just as by way of commentary, I guess, because this was the only information that was included, we can assume, probably with pretty high confidence, that this Thomas Gunton was created from an extracted marriage record, because English marriage records did not include birth information. They did include ages oftentimes, but there was definitely no birthplace given on the marriage records of this in the 1800s. And so the fact that all we've got is a marriage date and place and a wife says to me that this probably came from an extracted marriage. So could this be the same as one of these other two Thomases? Sure. Do we know yet? No, not so much. We'd need to do a little more checking. Then finally, we've got another Thomas Gunton who has a wife of just Susan with no last name, and this Thomas Gunton has a child named George Payne Gunton, born in 1846 in Chatteris. Well, as we look at this, we can't be confident that any of these people are the same person. We just don't have enough information to tell. And in fact, we've got some information that indicates that they probably aren't. For instance, different dads' names. And like I said before, could they still be the same person? Yeah, if it was William Thomas Gunton, but definitely we want to check it out. Another anomaly or another contradiction here is that this Thomas got married in 1854. Well, this Thomas's son was born in 46, so almost 10 years before the other one got married. Now, could this be a second marriage for this one? Yeah, it could be. At this point, we just don't have the information that we need. So that's our next task. We're going to look for this information. And at this point, we're going to do one of those things like, the cooking shows where they throw something in the oven and then fast forward to 30 minutes later when it's done. So I checked on this information, and instead of walking us through all of it, because it would make the webinar last for like 3 hours, I'm just going to show you what I found. So by finding this family in the census and looking at birth registrations for the children, it appears that the mother's maiden name is Bodger. I never was able to find conclusive information, not yet, on this family, but I found a very likely marriage, and it was actually the only one I could find for a Thomas and a Jane that was reasonable given his birth year, and her last name was Robinson. So it's starting to look more and more like these two are probably not the same people. Then we come over here to Thomas, and he was actually pretty easy to find information on because we had his marriage record. So when I found the actual marriage record, it gave the name of the dad as William, and it gave his age so that we know he's born about in 1832. Well, that's kind of starting to look like a possible match for the first guy. So I want to do a little more checking on that, but I'm considering those as a pretty good possibility for a real duplicate. As I looked through the census, though, as I found this couple in the census, they didn't have any kids. Now, they could have had children that died between censuses, but at least in the census records I found, they did not have any children living with them. Now, finally, on the last one, we can be confident that this is a completely different record that is not any of these others. There are just too many differences. So this guy was born in 1821, even though he was christened as an adult with some of his siblings, actually. But the birth records are very clear that the christening record actually is very clear that he was born in 1821, even though he had the unusual event of being christened as an adult. His parents are Christopher Gunton and Sarah Osler, so not even close to these others. He was born in 1843, way before, he was married in 1843, so way before this marriage, and most likely before this marriage, because if these guys were born in 31, they would have been 12 in 1843. So they are not getting married then, right? So this guy, totally different. The wife's name is different. And when I found the wife's maiden name, it fit with the custom of giving the child the maiden name of the mother. You might have noticed that on the first record that we looked at, let me go back here, that the first one was given as Susan. But as I looked at the different records, the census records, the christening records for other children, most of the time she went by Susanna. And in my research, it's been usual for not just this family, but many families to use the name Susan and Susanna interchangeably. So because all the other information added up, I was very confident that I'd found the right information for this family, and she either went by Susanna or by Susan. So this is, as we've done this simple research, which actually didn't really take that long, especially with the logo search, we've got a lot better basis for deciding whether we should merge these people. The final decision, again, just to be clear, is that I don't want to merge this person with this one, and I don't want to, or excuse me, this one is a candidate to be merged with the first one, and this one definitely isn't. So do you see how just a little bit of checking gave us a higher degree of confidence in making correct merges? So let's talk about why possible duplicates might not be actual duplicates. That can be puzzling to a lot of users because, again, we have such high confidence in our technology. Well, there's a number of reasons. As many of you have probably found in doing your own research, or maybe in your own lives, two people may have similar names and similar vital information, but they can still not be the same person. In earlier times especially, many families reused names, and many families lived in the same area for generations. And so I've run across more than one instance of cousins that were born maybe within 6 months or a year of each other, live in the same place, have the same name, but they're definitely not the same person. They're cousins. So we have to be careful about that. And Family Tree, of course, will, again, it computes those duplicates based on common information. And so it's doing the best it can for a computer. That's why we as humans have to come in, and also, to put another plug in for relying on the spirit, we can tell a lot of times if we get those kind of uncomfortable feelings, or it doesn't really matter if you call it the spirit or your gut instinct or whatever, but if you have an uncomfortable feeling about a merge, that's a good reason to check into it before doing it. So another reason that a possible duplicate might not really be a duplicate is that a lot of information in family tree is not yet complete. So for example, two people with only birth information might look the same, but as you research them more carefully and you find relationships and dates, you discover that they really aren't the same people. And then finally, there can be information in family tree that's not correct, especially from bad merges. And here's the challenge with that. The family tree duplicate hinting algorithm and the record hint algorithm both rely on the information on the person page, because what else could they rely on, right? They're trying to find information that matches what's already on that person page. Well, if there have been a series of bad merges, then guess what? It's going to suggest bad sources and it's going to suggest more bad merges. And so there's really the only solution to family search and family tree giving bad record hints and bad duplicate hints is for us as users to make sure that the information is correct as possible on the person page, because family search has to use that information. There's no other way that it can search for records and duplicates. So that's our responsibility to make sure that it's as accurate as possible. The possible duplicates function isn't magic, and it's not a guarantee of that the duplicate actually really is a duplicate, but it is a valuable tool for helping us get things right in family tree. Okay, so with those examples that we've looked at, let's wrap up the webinar by deducing some principles for avoiding incorrect merges. Principle 1, look at what you know and what it means. Ask yourself if something is unlikely or impossible. So it's not enough to just look and say, oh, Cecilia was born in 48, her parents were born in 85 and 97 of the previous century. Okay, good. We have to think about what that means, what their ages would have been, and whether that's very likely to be accurate. Principle 2, it's important to look at what we don't know. So when we looked at John Pringle and Eleanor, who were listed as Cecilia's parents, the information was very scanty. So just because they had the same names, we weren't justified in concluding that they were the same people as that John Pringle and Eleanor Berkeley. So question your assumptions, and if we don't have a lot of information, then we have to really be careful to avoid jumping to conclusions about the information we don't have. Principle number 3, determine who the person was intended to be. So this is a snapshot of the changelog for that Thomas Gunton that we looked at, added by my cousin. So this shows where she added him with an 1832 birth year and a birthplace of Chatras. The name was added as Thomas, the mom was added as Jane, and the dad was added as William. So I know from the changelog that my cousin, when she added this person, she intended Thomas to be the son of, in fact, I think I've got a call out on the next. Yeah, I do. She intended Thomas Gunton to be the son of William and Jane, to be born in 1832, and to be born in Chatras. That's the individual that she intended this person to be. Principle 4, watch for signs of incorrect previous merges and resolve them before deciding whether or not to merge. So this is actually an example for those of you who listened to the case study on Elizabeth Hepton. That's a different webinar. You'll recognize this. For those of you who may have missed that webinar, you can go to our webinar page or to our YouTube channel and search for Double Trouble Elizabeth Hepton, and you'll find that webinar. But here we've got a couple of red flags about that indicate that there may be a bad merge here. Elizabeth's birth was in 1812 in the county of Durham, but her christening takes place 4 years later in a different county. Now, in modern society, that may not be that unusual, but back then, that was very unusual. Children were usually christened very close to when they were born, and they were christened in the same parish and the same county. Here's another example of a red flag. And if you look in this change log, and it's so tiny you can't read it, but it gives you the principle of the thing. And that is that we see that there have been at least 3 merges already made to this person. Could they be correct? Absolutely. But could they be incorrect? Yeah, they could. So it's important to check them out. So many merges, especially if you see that some merges involve contradictory information, such as different birthplace, different birth location, those are red flags. Principle 5, add more information, relationships, and sources to reduce the likelihood of incorrect possible duplicates. And this is so important and actually so fun that I want to give a quick example here. This illustrates what we were talking about earlier, that Family Tree really does rely on this information on the person page when it is bringing up these possible duplicate hints and these record hints. And by adding correct information, you can actually get rid of an incorrect possible duplicate hint. Here's a quick example. Here we've got the possible duplicate for this Isaac Horridge. Let's go ahead and compare these 2 Isaacs. So on the left, we see the original Isaac. He's got some pretty decent, pretty complete birth, christening, and death information. But as we look at the other Isaac, he doesn't have a lot. So we don't have what we need right now to prove him one way or the other. Let's look at the family. Well, as we scroll down on the first Isaac's page, we see that he has had 3 marriages. And we do see that his last wife is named Margaret. Then, as we look over to the other Isaac, we see that his wife is also named Margaret. They've got 4 children in Family Tree. This Isaac and Margaret do not have any children. If they did, there would be a number by them, but there's no number. And if you were to expand them, you would see, if you were to expand this couple, you would see that there were no children listed under them. So we still don't really have enough information to decide whether these people are the same or not. So we've got to do a little checking. Well, a quick search in historical records shows that Margaret's maiden name is Unsworth. And the way that I was able to determine that was by checking the civil birth registrations of these children. And they all gave Unsworth as the maiden name. Or actually, I take that back. I only checked 2. I checked the first and the last, and they both gave Unsworth as the maiden name of Margaret. So she's definitely not Margaret Whittaker. But then also, when we looked in the census, Isaac was born about 1838 in Tildesley, Lancashire. So he was born in a completely different year and place than the other Isaac. So this shows the corrected information for the second Isaac. I've put in his correct birth information, and I've changed the married name of his wife to the maiden name. So now let's go back and look at the first Isaac. Oh, I forgot. I wanted to put in a plug to be sure and add sources. It's really, really great for you to identify an incorrect merge, or excuse me, identify an incorrect possible duplicate hint, to do that research. But if it just stays on your computer or in your mind, that's not going to help other people who come along. So be sure and attach any sources that you find that helped you distinguish that that was not a correct possible duplicate. So after I went back and I added the information and the sources, look back on the original Isaac's page, that possible duplicate is no longer there. And you may need to refresh after you refresh Isaac's page after you've added that information. But this just shows that Family Tree is really sensitive to the correct information. And if you give it correct information, it will give you highly accurate duplicates and hints. But anytime that we give it bad information, either through maybe not being so careful with our research or through a bad merge, then it's that old principle of garbage in, garbage out. Family Tree is going to give us hints that match the information on the page. Now, I did want to comment on one final conclusion. What if you've identified that an incorrect possible duplicate has appeared, but it stays there even after you've corrected all the information? Well, there's a way to mark it not a match. What you do is you go to Show All above the incorrect possible duplicate, and then when you find the incorrect possible duplicate on the screen that comes up, just click Not a Match. Then give a good reason statement. And when I say good, I don't mean long or I don't mean complicated, but just provide a simple and a clear statement. How do you know that these two people are not the same? And I always like to include the PIDs in my reason statement because you never know what subsequent merges might be made. And I want future users and even myself, when we check in the changelog and we see this not a match declaration, I want to know why I thought it was not a match, and I want to know who I was marking not a match, who those exact records were. So I just here stated that one of the guys was born in Elton, Lancashire in 1822. The other guy was born in Tildesley in 1838. And that's why I've concluded that they're not the same person. And finally, you just click Save. So let's summarize those principles that we deduced from our examples. Look at what you know and what it means. Look at what you don't know and be careful not to assume based on based on missing information. Determine from the changelog usually who the person was intended to be. Watch for signs of previous incorrect merges and resolve those before continuing. Add more information, relationships, and sources to reduce the likelihood of incorrect possible duplicates. And finally, when in doubt, don't merge. It is much easier to avoid an incorrect merge than it is to undo an incorrect merge. So here's our summary of what we talked about today. We talked about why duplicates are a challenge in Family Tree. We're never going to be rid of duplicates. So what we need to do is know how to deal with them. And we're never going to be rid of false duplicates either, as long as the system's going until it's finally perfected in the very end. But we're always going to be dealing with true duplicates and false duplicates. So we need to become skilled at identifying them. We gave an example of a good merge. We walked through an example that had those 4 Thomas Guntons, where we could decide that probably or possibly 2 of them were the same, but 2 of them definitely weren't the same. We talked about the fact that just because Family Tree identifies a duplicate or possible duplicate doesn't mean it's an actual duplicate. And then we went over those principles for avoiding incorrect merges. So everybody, that brings us to the end of our webinar today. Thank you so much for joining us. And I hope this has been helpful. I hope it will help you in the future as you go forth into Family Tree and try to determine whether duplicates are real and should be merged, or whether they are not real and should not be merged. So Bryant, do we have any questions that we want to address?
Yes, we do have one question. It's from Richard Davies, and he asks, when detaching a source, why doesn't the additional information that was added when the incorrect source was attached get removed?
That is such a good question, Richard. Okay, here's the deal. When you merge 2 people, immediately after the merge, if no users have made changes to that information, then you can go into the changelog and there is an unmerge button and you can click it, and that actually will put the sources back where they belong. But if there has been even one change since that merge, correct or incorrect, then FamilySearch does not allow you to unmerge the people just with the click of a button, because it doesn't know where to put the information that was added after the merge. Does it apply to the original person, to the person that got archived, or to neither of them? And so for that reason, every bit of information, including sources that were added after the merge, that were added after the merge and after changes were made, all that stuff stays on the surviving record, even if you undelete that person that was incorrectly merged. Does that make sense? If not, please ask another question and I'll try to clarify.
Thanks, Kathryn.
You're welcome.
We got one more question. It says, do you suggest watching everyone?
That is a really good question too. Do you suggest watching everyone or just your main lines? You can have, as I recall, up to 3,000 people that you're watching, but that can get a little unwieldy. I usually only watch people that have a history of bad merges. So if I think that there's a potential for bad merges, maybe they've got like possible duplicates popping up all the time. Honestly, I don't have the time to monitor everybody, and probably you don't either. So I would say just monitor those people that you're particularly concerned about. Great question.
Great. Thanks, Kathryn. If there's no more questions, then that will be the end of the webinar today. We'd like to thank everyone for joining and would like to remind everyone about our upcoming webinar on February 21st, Friday at 4 p.m., Making the Most Out of German Immigrants in American Church Records with Dr. Roger Minert. So please join us for that one. We're looking forward to it on February 21st. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.